Hello, and welcome to Doctor Who 50 years ago, the show that looks back to the episode that aired in 1967 and looks at the differences between then and now. This week, episode 4 of The Evil of the Daleks, where Jamie goes off on one. I am Ben.
I am Luke.
And I'm Nick.
And here we are, and here we go into the news from 1967. Spoiler alert, there's only one thing that happens this week. Pay attention. On Monday, the 5th of June, war! Israel preemptively struck Egypt's air force, destroying half its fleet on the ground, leaving the Egyptian army in the Sinai strip defenceless. Jordan, meanwhile, started what is described as an ill-fated campaign against Israel. Oh joy, thus is the Six-Day War. Tuesday, 6th of June, East Jerusalem's captured in a battle conducted by Israeli forces without artillery, so as not to damage the holy city. The Suez Canal gets closed to all ships in retaliation for American and British support of Israel during the war, and so on and so on and so on. Israel liberates, in inverted commas, Jerusalem on the Wednesday, and point made, Israel and Jordan agrees to a ceasefire. Egypt agrees a day later, and by Saturday the 10th of June, the Six-Day War is over. Israelis have crossed into new homes in Jerusalem, the Soviet Union severs diplomatic relations with the country, and the Middle East quietens down again, sort of. Here's your big Middle Eastern skirmish for the decade, perhaps for the second half of the 20th century.
Yeah, this is the war that we are still living the consequences of now, seeing as all the territory, all the peace kind of processes, especially the ones that were talked about by the Obama administration, are all about Israel giving up the land that it occupies due to this war. Whenever you look at a map of the globe, and you see the borders of Israel, it's the borders that they had before this war, because no one actually accepts that they legally occupy the territories.
It is in dispute and has been for the past 50 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I guess this is a case of there's been no change for 50 years, basically, from that once the Israelis took over the territory.
But comparing 50 years ago to now, and the quite relevant news that Turkey is more than happy to put forces against Qatar, it looks like we might be going all actiony and military again in the area.
Yeah. Yes, no, the Middle East... I suppose, again, it's another thing that's not changed. If anything, it's only gotten worse, is that the violence in the Middle East, it maybe 50 years ago was more contained to Israel and sort of the neighbouring countries around it, but now it's expanded to pretty much everywhere in the Middle East.
Whether they like it or not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere since this time which we can say was... Well, in the olden days of yore, people would invade each other for territory and successfully take it. Is there anywhere since this moment where we can say that sort of thing happened, or is this one of the last ones?
I would say Russia invading Georgia and Russia invading Ukraine are probably the most recent examples of a country successfully taking over territory that no one else recognizes.
I see.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, in 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine and occupied the Crimean Peninsula, which, if you look at any map of the world, no one accepts that. Certainly no one in the West accepts that, legally speaking.
Well, it's interesting that in this moment in time, even 50 years ago, you can legally invade somewhere and just take it over, and you still can't nowadays, as opposed to, well, on our future podcast, Doctor Who 500 years ago, where we look at stone engravings of Daleks. In that sort of time, we would be saying, yeah, these places can invade each other, but it says something about the modern day that we've lost that.
Yeah. Well, it's a more of a we want peace since after the Second World War, where the current international system was set up. That sort of stopped, because before then, territory was quite routinely exchanged between countries, but that was before the Second World War.
Yeah, once we saw how big and devastating it could be.
Yeah.
Yes, we decided screw that. Yeah, there we are. So yeah, there is your Six-Day War summary in about 5 minutes, which is much more coverage than we had in the actual news. There we are. Which is a shame, because we might be about to go into another bout of it. But anyway, that was the news. And now we shall get into The Evil of the Daleks, episode 4, which, to use a Dalek lingo, was visually impaired.
Yeah, I looked. The first 5 minutes, there is no dialogue, and it's just a fight scene, pretty much.
Oh, yes. Yeah. It could also probably be construed as Dr. Light.
Yeah, I thought this was fairly it's quite different from most of the fair Doctor Who that you had up till now, I think. I'd say probably the thing I'm thinking of this season that came closest to it was the fight scene on the ship in the Highlanders, in terms of the closest to an extended battle scene, but that's about it.
Yes, and was Troughton actually taking a holiday? Because now that I think of it, the 2 scenes he had, they could have been pre-recorded.
I guess it's something we can look at for the final.
At the end, yeah. Yeah, okay. There's a question
But
you can...
If he was on holiday, but still pre-recorded, that sets him a bit above Hartnell, who would leave and say, "Oh, well, I'll just be asleep for that episode."
Yeah, and this is definitely again showing how the show is different from how it was under Hartnell. You didn't get long periods with no dialogue and people fighting. It was generally more of a talky show.
Yes.
What do you think?
This episode interests me because it's all about the human factor, so I find it a little fitting that the Daleks and the Doctor aren't really in it. The Daleks are always lurking in the shadows, and we see how Maxtable and Terrell and Jamie and Kemmel all interact with each other. And while we have the Doctor narrating what Jamie says, we also get to see firsthand all of the drama in the house.
Yes.
By shifting its focus onto the humans and away from the Doctor, it does make its points very effectively.
It is showing the impact that the Daleks and the Doctor make on the lives of humans, which is part of the human factor, I presume.
Yeah.
Very interesting. It's almost close to a spin-off series that we would get today. These characters would end up either with their own Big Finish audio drama, or if they have an extended hiatus, an 8-part miniseries, which nobody likes. Debatable.
I would say that this is a fresh example of missing episodes being completely inaccessible, and I totally see why they animated Power rather than this, because to animate this episode would be very troubling. I mean, if you only have 6 months to animate a Doctor Who story, and you're going to want...
which is already a terrible idea to give you such a limited time.
And you want one which will sell well, you're going to go with Power. Just have the Doctor doing... It's basically like cardboard sock puppets.
Yeah, well, because at least with Power, there's some sort of marketing thing you can do. Here, the only thing you can say is, "Oh, there are Daleks in it." There isn't really anything else that's marketable about it.
Apart from the fact it's quite good.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, but the thing is, because it's so difficult to watch as a lost serial, there won't be that many people who know how good it is. I knew it was meant to be good, but I mean, that's not the same thing as actually seeing it yourself.
It has passed into the myths and legends status. So let us debunk some myths and destroy some legends by looking at this episode in greater detail. What a segue. Jamie and Kemmel have a fight, a Scott versus Turk bout, which is thrilling with telesnaps. Visual impairment number 1. Eventually, Kemmel almost falls to his death, but is saved by Jamie, who continues his quest to find Victoria, with the Daleks giving him clues all the way. Kemmel then saves him from a trap, thus the two become friends. This, the Doctor explains, is a vital part of the human factor he is making up, and that's your first 5 minutes.
What is good about this fight is that, from what we can read about it, is that it is paced very well and has a certain rawness to it. And I imagine it would be filmed in very static shots, maybe with some dollying around. If we compare this with typical Hollywood action of today, where it's all quick cuts that make no sense, horrid. When you have just that one shot to play with, you're going to have to make it good, you're going to have to make it paced. And that's something that we have lost, I think.
I was going to say, it depends on the fighter ranger. No, none of us looked at the credits, I presume. Shall we find out who the fighter ranger was?
Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to bet £400 it's Derek Ware.
I wouldn't do that if I were you. It's Peter Diamond.
Oh no!
Well, you just lost £400, Luke.
Would you be callous enough to take
I
it
remember.
from me?
I remember seeing him on the credits of the Indiana Jones movie preceding this week's episode of Doctor Who, and I was just like, "Yay, Peter Diamond!"
Huh.
He had a long life at fighter ranging.
Well, the action in Indiana Jones is
Which
also...
is a Hollywood movie.
No, I'm talking about stuff like
Neo.
Taken and Death Race. That sort of popcorn nonsense.
21st century film, then.
Yes, I'm talking 21st century, not the 80s.
New generation, new limited attention spans, so on and so forth.
One thing we haven't mentioned is the setup of the Doctor here. While he is opposed to the test, from here on until the end of it, he also takes a complete curiosity with it, and it's continuing that that alienness and lack of trust that we had in Power of the Daleks, which will set up next week's episode a little.
Maxtable and Waterfield find the dead body of that ruffian from last episode. So important was he that I've forgotten his name. I don't care, I've really just remembered it as Toby, but who cares? He is there to give Waterfield more ability to have a nervous breakdown against the orders of the Daleks. Maxtable pushes him on, not bothered by conscience, but is ready to kill him if necessary. These two. Plot development. Go.
Well, what I like about this is we have that hierarchy of evil. At the top we have the Dalek, who doesn't explain himself at all, and at the bottom we have Waterfield, who's terrified and doesn't know what's going on. He's very... I think this is one of his most sympathetic. He's almost got that Lesterson aspect to him, where he gets more and more insane and sympathetic as the story goes on. But Maxtable is the most interesting here, because he acts as a mediator, where his relationship to Waterfield is the way that he's translating what the Dalek is saying and getting Waterfield to do it. You can see it trickle down from that top evil. It's a hint of how devious Maxwell is. We see him sort of as a son of the Daleks in the way that he's able to explain them to his friends.
I liked having the scene with Maxtable being threatened by the Daleks. Or the Dalek, I should say. I think it made him a bit more sympathetic. Although, I mean, he's still not quite like Waterfield is. It certainly rounds him off more as a character rather than just being, oh, he's just a mad scientist. Although, in a later scene, he then does come out and out as a mad scientist.
Yeah.
It's crucial that in establishing this, he's just very short-sighted and he's very naive. He thinks he knows what the Daleks are really after, when in reality they're after so much more than he could ever imagine. They know so much more than he could ever imagine.
Possibly mad with the wanderlust of scientific discovery, which is a theme that Whittaker drew on from Power of the Daleks.
Yeah, so I would agree with you, Luke, that he is definitely a Lesterson figure. He's just a not quite a sympathetic Lesterson figure.
But with 100% more facial hair.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Jamie and Kemmel's equal lust for Victoria fuels their friendship and their search onwards, part of the human factor. It's the Doctor's day off, methinks, because I haven't seen him that much. Maxtable and Waterfield's friendship, strains under the watchful eye of Terrell, who stops Maxtable from killing Waterfield. It seems he has an upper hand in a Dalek monotone. On the subject of hierarchy, I was going to bring in Terrell, who seemingly muddies the waters on that kind of thing, because you wonder, he is subordinate to the Daleks, only mentally so, because he's got them chirping about in his head. I think he describes the mental impact the Daleks have on people, whereas Waterfield is a more physical impact, shall we say? That he's tired emotionally and physically into doing the will of the Daleks, whereas Terrell's just been magnetised.
What I read Terrell as, I read him in a very similar way to the Daleks in Manhattan, Dalek Sec, human Dalek nonsense, and as the human Daleks with the eye stalks in A Sign of the Daleks and Time of the Doctor.
Right.
There's a big difference between those CGI abominations and Terrell here. Terrell seems to be a product of the question, what would a human Dalek be like? In the sense that he becomes angry, he tells people to obey, whereas the human Dalek that we see in the news series are they're much more of a physical thing, and their personalities seem to take more of a back seat. Right.
It's interesting you've got that from Terrell, because I can't exactly get much from him. I feel he's sort of a side character that doesn't really drive any plot or purpose to the story, really, despite having me brought this up. I suppose he's there to add to being an obstacle in this 7-episode marathon.
Well, he doesn't add anything per se plot-wise. I can't actually say anything that he actually does in this story, except Maxwell doesn't kill Waterfield that one time. But he makes the Daleks very sinister in the way that they've basically made this guy mentally deranged.
Yeah,
and he's a footnote in the story. That's so evil. I mean, in a story called Evil of the Daleks, showing them break someone completely.
Physically and mentally, yeah.
Mm.
And we come back to my point. Brilliant. Perfect. Speaking of Daleks, Jamie and Kemmel are avoiding them and other traps to find Victoria. It goes on, this actiony bit we can't see, so must endure the soundtrack instead. The Doctor adds instinct and self-preservation to the human factor, the second of the two of the scenes he is in. His minimal appearance and witticisms in said appearances, seemingly to camera, are jarring in this episode, but then so is the Dalek CGI. It's an odd episode, this, and it only gets stranger. Partly because it's centred on the humans, as we've just recognised. And I'm about to say in my next spiel.
Yeah, I do like the occasional cutting back to the Doctor, where he's talking to the Daleks and he's explaining humanity to the Daleks, pretty much. And I think that this is taking the Daleks in a daring new direction for the show, because this is delving deeper into them than I would say beforehand, especially considering that originally they just started as Nazis in space. Here we're seeing them being a lot more cunning and insidious than they usually are.
An evolution from power. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. The only other serial where they're comparably cunning like this is Power of the Daleks, so...
Written by Whittaker, so all good.
Clearly Whittaker buys into this whole Daleks are much more cunning and evil than perhaps even Terry Nation would have envisaged them being.
Magnificent. Let's go to another plot strand. Molly believes she's heard Victoria committing to the Daleks' objectives, but Terrell shouts her down. This family falls to pieces under the Daleks. It's a pseudo upstairs-downstairs. Which makes sense given this time period and the human plot line for this entire episode. We learn that Maxtable wants his end of the bargain between the Daleks, the ability to turn metal into gold, another Victorian alchemy thing that Whittaker uses to make the story more believable and grounded in context. But then Maxtable seemingly talks to camera too, before having an argument with Ruth about Terrell and going off with his alchemy idea. This plot goes all over the place, telling how these humans are affected by the Daleks, these humans are affected by the Daleks. Yeah, it's the basis of the entire episode, really. Which is not bad for halfway through this serial. Well paced.
Yeah, this is exactly the point where we need to learn more. We know that Maxwell is villainous, but we don't know what he gets out of it. If he didn't give some sort of motivation or anything, he'd seem like a mustache-twirling nonsense spewer. So this is the point where we need to get something concrete.
So I think it's important to note that he's talking, the scientific concept that he's talking about, like transfusion of metal into gold, is insane. So it's showing that he is actually just a mad scientist, or at least that's his. No, he doesn't. To be fair, he doesn't really understand science anyway, because he was the one who was the money, not so much the brains. But also, I like that it's such a petty for him to be thinking that this is the secret they're going to give him, is the transmutation of metal into gold. When in reality, the Daleks know so much more than that, and he could learn so much more that would be so much more valuable, money-wise or any other way. The fact that he is just so naive and short-sighted and thinking he just wants to get rich makes him very petty, and I think it's a good way of showing how he exposes the bad sides of human nature.
When you say the bad side of human nature, it's very interesting when you say the Daleks know so much more. Maxwell has the chance to know so much more about this civilization, but he's just obsessed with his petty squabbles, which he believes are so above everything else. All he can learn from these alien beings is how to make his own life better. And there's that certain arrogance about the capitalist, and in fact a lot of Victorian conquerors, that Maxwell seems to be summing up, where the older generation were being considered as sort of like money-grabbing capitalists, basically, who saw no love for other cultures except for money. In fact,
and vice versa.
Very true, of course. Yeah. That arrogance of the ruling class, a very big theme that Maxwell sums up very well.
Yes, and then the next generation comes along and becomes hypocritically the ruling class. And thus time wounds on. Very deep. Anything else? Because we've run out of episode. Moving back to companions, Jamie and Kemal grapple with a Dalek or two and some rope climbing to get to Victoria. Very slowly indeed. The cliffhanger eventually is a Dalek coming up behind Jamie. Let's talk about companions.
Victoria being on a balcony is just further giving some more, evoking the imagery of fairy tale princess in need of being rescued, which was established in episode 2 with her first appearance.
Anything for the kids.
Yeah, it's just, I think it is just to evoke that imagery because that's basically what it is. It's Jamie is this knight in shining armor that has to come and rescue the damsel in distress.
So where do you think they went wrong, per se, with Ben and Polly, who were meant to be the younger generation of the swinging 60s back in 66?
I think
they then jumped to Victoria in 67.
I think, well, Ben and Polly just don't feel like that, because they're written by men in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They don't actually seem very young. They're just they're just a bit characterless. Yeah, they dress correctly and whatever, but they just were sort of empty characters. Whilst Jamie actually has a real character that you can get behind, and I think having a young Victoria I think also it makes sense from the point of view, Jamie's from 1745. Might it not be a good idea to have a female companion who is of a similar time period to him, so they can kind of get on more easily? especially if they want to introduce a very subtle kind of romance between them, which is very subtly hinted at throughout their time there together.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say having someone from the modern day and Jane just wouldn't gel.
Anything else?
No, I'm good.
No. So what we have here is a middle of a 7-parter which focuses on the secondary characters, which so happen to be humans, who are affected by the story title, The Evil of the Daleks. There's actiony bits which correlate to the news from 50 years ago, in some manner. Well, there's a war, there's some fighting, that happens, right? And it all continues in a paced manner. There we go, and that is the subject of Doctor Who 50 years ago. Thank you very much for watching. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes. Leave positive comments there, it helps. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube, where you can like, comment and subscribe, and Google Plus if you dare. We shall be back next week to survive episode 5 of The Evil of the Daleks. Until then, I have been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I've been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye.